It's time for us to turn our focus to Africa, where we explore issues that shape the continent's relationship with the wider world. Now, today we're looking at a topic that could have significant implications for Africa, and that's America's next president. With the U.S. presidential election now over, with Donald J. Trump emerging the winner, the world is watching closely, and Africa is no exception. Now, President-elect Donald J. Trump has made waves with statements on international policy that could reshape America's approach to Africa, from trade agreements to military aid and from immigration policies to foreign investments. These decisions have ripple effects across the continent. But what could a Trump-led administration mean for Africa? And what should African leaders be considering as they prepare for either continuity or change in the U.S. administration?
So joining us to provide insight, we have News Central's international correspondent, Afua Hagan, who has been covering the U.S. elections, and also Joi John, Bellcrest Institute, Washington, D.C. Thank you both for joining us this morning to have this very interesting conversation. Thank you, ladies. Now, Afua, let's come to you. So given the latest statements from Donald Trump from his campaign run, and now winning the elections, how important is Africa in the U.S. political narrative? Are we there at all, or no?
And that's a good question, isn't it? I think perhaps with Donald J. Trump's approach to Africa in the past is that we could see more relationships based on what America could get from the continent of Africa, as opposed to things like aid, human rights, bilateral sort of agreements. I think a lot of African leaders were pleased, actually, that Trump won the election. Uganda particularly was celebrating, saying that sanctions would be gone. And I think there is an air, perhaps, that this could be a new age for America and countries in Africa, that it could be built more on trade. When I was in Washington, D.C., we came across people from an Ethiopian American community. And of course, we know that people in the diaspora are not a monolith and they don't all think the same way. But this particular rally that I came across was Ethiopians, Americans for Trump. Really, really supportive of Trump and the Republicans, and were supporting a local congressman. And when I asked them the reasons why, they said that there was a conflict in Ethiopia that had been going for years, and they felt that not only did the Biden-Harris administration not do anything about it, that they perhaps provided funds that went on to further fund that conflict. And they say Trump would speak to leaders on the ground in that country and wouldn't do that. And that's why they were voting for the Republican candidate and therefore voting for Trump. And they also talked about their values, their Christian and Muslim values, aligning more with the Republicans than they would with the Democrats. And so I think these are thoughts that are not just of people of African descent in the diaspora, but relate to people on the continent as well. And so I think that these things will also influence the amount of support that Trump has, not just from voters, not just from people, but from leaders on the ground throughout the continent as well.
It's very interesting that you saw that support from the Ethiopian diaspora there, because if I recall, during Trump's previous administration, right, and especially at the cusp of the pandemic, or right in the thick of the eye of the pandemic, the comments that he made regarding the DG of the WHO, who is an indigent and an Ethiopian as well, it's quite interesting when you see their support and the comments that he was making about the man who was at the helm of affairs when it comes to the African continent and health in particular. And so it begs to ask the question, giving his past administration and his previous administration and the comments that he made about Africa, do you see a difference with his coming administration come January 2025?
Oh, absolutely not. We can expect more of the same. I mean, we cannot forget when Trump called Africa and said some countries in Africa were S-hole countries. I'm not going to say the swear word here. But, I think people have short-term memory loss, and people are prepared to forgive gaffes and forgive what they say is, people making quote-unquote funny comments because of what they can get for their pocket. Look, the economy is such a huge it was such a huge issue when people went to the ballot box, so much more than I think both the Republicans and the Democrats realize. And people are thinking in a very individualistic way. What's good for me and my family, not necessarily about what's good for community, what's good for my state as a whole. And so therefore people are generally just thinking, about themselves. And so they're willing to forgive Trump labeling a continent, a country as something, making derogatory comments about, like you said, people from the diaspora, people from the continent and all the rest of it, because they think, well, how much money do I have in my bank account at the end of the week or at the end of the month? That is really, really high on people's minds. And they're willing to forgive all these things that Trump may say, may do, what may happen to other members of their community. He talks about his mass deportation plans that could affect, thousands, if not millions of people in the diaspora who are from the continent of Africa. But people are so willing to forgive that because of what Trump said he will do for the economy. But if you really want to drill down on tariffs and really want to drill down into that will actually make prices higher for people, will increase inflation. So I think there's it's going to be a huge disconnect, because people are going to find that this Trump term is going to be more of the same, but perhaps with the kind of this is his last 4 years, right? He has to really make an impression. He has to really do what he set out to do, perhaps that he didn't get to finish in the first 4 years. And you do still have some of that anger left over from the fact that he felt he won the election last time but wasn't in office. What part will revenge play in this term? And so, yes, we can absolutely expect more of the same, if not worse.
I feel you hit a very interesting point there regarding revenge. I've never really even thought about that one since after he was announced winner. But that's a very interesting point. I'm told that we have to let you go now, Afua, but thank you very much for joining us to give your own 2 pence on the situation. Now, let's come to you, Joi John, regarding the relationship between America and Africa once Trump is in office. How might African countries need to position themselves with Trump returning now as president? Are there specific areas that you think African leaders might need to perhaps recalibrate their diplomatic ties or trade strategies?
Thank you for having me. With President Donald Trump's return to the White House next year, African countries must align their priorities with U.S. interests. I'm talking trade, security, and investment. The U.S. policy towards Africa in the past has long been pretty transactional. So there should be a focus on key sectors like energy, infrastructure, and agriculture while working to strengthen the regional partnerships across Africa.
Joi, I'm glad we're talking about, just partnerships, because then we're going to bring the African Growth Opportunity Act, AGOA, right, which is pretty much an act that has been enacted since 2000. 25 years, and it provides duty-free access to the U.S. market for almost all products exported from more than 40 eligible sub-Saharan African countries, including South Africa and Nigeria. Now, Trump has said that he will put back tariffs, because we know that some of the products on this act and under this program means that they would send their products in the U.S. market without the tariffs. But he said he will put tariffs, and also this is now hanging on the loom, because we know that the 25-year mark is ending and it would now be renegotiated on the table. Do you see with Trump, campaigning on tariffs will be put back into acts like this, and people will have to pay tariff to do business in the U.S.? How do you see this playing out during his administration?
Yes, I really can't speculate, but I know that there are concerns that Trump may roll back on investment and trade. Talking about AGOA, African Growth and Opportunity Act, it's a key source for concern. Really. And during his first term, he was very clear in his stance that he had no plans to renew it at its expiration in 2025. Mm-hmm. And when he campaigned, it was one of the things on the table as well. So for Africa to navigate potential challenges that this may bring, I think that a multi-pronged approach is key. is key to address it. And I'm talking in areas of strengthening intra-African cooperation through mechanisms like the AFC, FTA, and the African Union. That becomes paramount. Also, we're looking at diversifying international partnerships. And thirdly, accelerating domestic resource mobilization and reducing aid dependency. I think that could help us cushion any likely effects of any, U.S. Policy shifts towards Africa.
All right, Joi, regarding the relationship with the Trump win and the different little spates or wars that we have, there's the argument that a Trump win is a big win when it comes to the war against between Russia and Ukraine, and also the Israeli-Hamas war as well. Is this true? Are you of that stand where it's like, okay, these are going to end very soon because he's going to stop funding here, or at least have some negotiations with people or parties that he had or friendships with while he was in power? Where do you stand on this?
Well, I could say that Trump is the only president that did not, go to war as president. He was the only U.S. president in history. In his 4-year term, we did not go to war. And talking about Ukraine and Russia, we will see how that goes. I know that Trump has a great relationship with Putin and the people of Russia. And he's also spoken to the Ukrainian president. So I believe that there will be some kind of truce under the Trump administration when he takes over next year.
Right.
And what about immigration? That seems to be big on the table, whether it's immigration from Mexico or even the African side of things. What do you think his policies might show now, since he's had 4 years to think about perhaps maybe they might not have worked from before?
Well, yes, again, we really can't speculate. I would say that a lot of people have, expressed concerns about immigration and that blockage there. But I don't think it's harsh. It's going to come out as harsh as people portray it to be. The U.S. has laws. We have a tradition. We have principles that guide us. And any drastic change has to go through the courts, has to go through Congress, and has to go to the Senate. Yeah.
When you say that that Donald is the only person who's not gone to war in all American, in the entirety of American presidents, has Biden gone to war as well?
Mm-hmm.
Well, we have the war. We have the war in Ukraine, but that's something that the U.S. has been funding aid towards Ukraine. We also have issues with other countries. I don't want to delve into that because it's more on a diplomatic side.
Yeah.
But there has been. He's the only president that has not gone to war. And yes, we have had conflicts with other nations in the last 4 years.
Yeah, because one thing we know for certain about America is that one of the investment that they do is the fact that they would always back their allies. And Ukraine, for example, is an ally where they send aid and they send as much aid. And not only America, we also know that the SA, South Africa, is sending aid and supporting Russia. And so when we have this conversation, it's best to just put into perspective what they are. But Joi, let me ask you about, the influence of China in Africa. That's a conversation that needs to be had. And we know that Trump has his relationship with China, as we've seen with his last administration. Will Trump's win impact the U.S. China competition in Africa? And what might that mean for African nations?
Yes, China has built a presence in Africa. They have provided aid to African countries without, certain restrictions that other Western countries have imposed on them. So it's pretty much they've come with money to the table in dealing with Africa. Now the U.S. will struggle to compete for that presence in Africa if they consider Africa a priority.
And lastly, just before I let you go, because I have to talk about, what your advice then would be to African, leaders, most importantly, policymakers, as we've observed the election and as we prepare for what might be a shift in the U.S. policies and programs come January of 2025. What would be your call to action for African leaders?
Very simple. I would say this is a moment for African leaders to strengthen governance. build the economy, build economic resilience, and of course, demonstrate unity. A stable, well-governed country will always or naturally draw respect and stronger partnerships from any administration, regardless of what side of divide is in power. Look at countries like Rwanda, Egypt; they're doing amazingly well. And for us back home, for African countries at large, I think it means also addressing corruption, the issue of corruption, enhancing regional stability, investing also in human capital. You can't come to the table when you have when you don't have all your boxes checked. You have to put your house in order before coming to the drawing board. And I think to be taken seriously on the world stage, our African leaders should do better in, I would say, committing to accountability and effective implementation of the policies that will benefit their citizens.
Well, Joi, we must say thank you so much for just taking out the time this morning to join us and just give us just an in-depth analysis on the African continent. I mean, it's clear that African nations will need to be proactive and strategic in navigating the evolving and ever-changing relationship with the world's major power. Well, many thanks again.
Thank you very much, Joi.